Adebayo and Tim Vickery.
We're not even wasting time on this edition because we've got arguably two legendinos on the same point. David Goldblatt, we wait ages and ages and ages and ages for one of his books to come along, and it never disappoints. So this time around, he's done a proper cracker of a job on football and its prism to the world. Injury Time, it's called. Thank you, Tim. David, welcome back, mate. Whew,
lovely to be with you. Thank you for having me.
You've kept me up at night, you know, and I'm supposed to be keeping you up at night, technically. But what a book you've got. So much to talk about. I don't want to waste any time, but let's get the elephant in the room out of the way, first of all. North London, what, Tim? Hang on. Eberichi Eze?
An ain't.
But nevertheless, we who are over here in the UK, David, know what a fiasco that has been. Any thoughts on that first?
Well, it just strikes me, you know, Daniel Levy is always portrayed, and I think thinks of himself as one of, you know, the great wheeler dealers and the smartest businessman in the room, etc. And like, why didn't he just pay up the extra 5 million and get on with it and sort it out? You know, I just think it's an absolutely just disastrous bit of transfer dealing by, you know, someone who's meant to be an expert.
Is this not Mr. Goldblatt? Injury time. The absolute. We will get there. The book, I think, Injury Time, Football in a State of Emergency. It's a story, and I think it starts with a fantastic premise. It's a brilliant premise. Let's go back to the mid-80s and the low point of football. Fast forward 40 years, and football is the nation's soap opera. What story were you trying to tell?
Well, I kind of feel that the last 10 or 15 years have been, I suspect, as nothing as to the next 10 or 15 to come. And I was looking around saying, where's the book that covers this? Who can, you know, we've had a global economic crisis. We've had the destruction of what was left. We've had COVID. We've had populism. The rise of social media, a mental health crisis, a climate crisis. Books and thoughts and books about bits of it. Where's the thing that puts it all together? And story will allow me to begin to make sense of this just maelstrom of social change in my books. I get to the point, well, if someone else isn't going to do it, I'm just going to have to do it myself, grasp all of these extraordinary things and the place of football within it. I mean, football's not just a reflection of these things, though it is. It has become actually the central mode of collective thing. That's a whole another debate that we can have, but it sure occupies that phrase other than conspiracy theories. And so I hummed and match of the day goes on strike because Gary Lineker has tweeted about the government's just and been forced to step down. And then Ian Wright and Alan Shearer say, well, we're out too. And then the rest of the without commentary or punditry or anything appears. And I just thought, this is amazing that football is the most sort of public and powerful way. I gotta see what we can do here. So it's tell the story of modern Britain, and it's one told, in anger. It's one that really comes from a place of love as well. I love this place, and both of which seem to me imperiled and undermined in so many ways, intellectual and emotional energy together in one place.
Let me just say, for the purposes, David, to take the opportunity, you can contact him by all the methods shown just below, etc. You can follow us on YouTube. Make sure you do that as well, and then you can just send us a message as you listen. And of course, if you're not listening live on YouTube now, well, you can listen again in the audio version of the podcast. Quite a few things, and David's already explained the premise of the book. Then we ought to add the word cultural commentator to your many list of titles, which include sports journalist, or sports writer, author of amazing books, because you're right, you do find the story that nobody else is telling. I love the way Tim set this up as, the nation's soap opera. Got quite a few questions myself.
He set it up. He set that up.
Yeah,
that's the way he sets the book up. Yeah,
exactly. But you picked it up for our podcast as a launching pad, and I think that's an important point in itself. And hopefully, we'll come back to that in many different ways as well. But it's not just the fact that you've identified the gap in the market, but also it's the way you tell it. And I've always thought that football's interesting when we pull out, or when we look at the world through the prism of football, like Bob Marley did. Bob Marley, as you know, he would say, "Oh man, football, it's about the world." And he's the first person I ever heard say it in that way, that, football is not just a round ball. Look at the shape of the earth. Look at the shape of that ball. What do you think is connected, etc.? And we don't always see that. One of your early chapters is about Brexit. And I'd forgotten, genuinely, I'd forgotten how much football was linked to the Brexit debate, and how footballers, individual footballers, were convinced to come out either in favour of Brexit or in favour of Remain. I'm going to ask you questions on this later on, Tim. So remember, the question will be, did David Beckham err on the side of Remain, or did he err on the side of Brexit? You've read the book, so you ought to know. But yeah, we forget, don't we, David, that football is actually the politics as well, the real politics of this country.
You've forgotten. I'd forgotten. I went back, and it was, discovered that David James, was writing articles about this in The Sun, arguing like kind of some of the Leave campaign was saying, sure, we'll leave Europe, but this is going to open up India to us. He wrote this article in The Sun saying, this is great. India is going to provide a whole new bunch of footballers. We're going to not have Europeans, but that's going to be good for India. Who knew? Sol Campbell, similarly, was wheeled out to make the argument that,
Do you think they were making a point? I'm sorry to cut you there, because that struck me, that they use these two, if you like, sons of immigration to say, well, hang on a second, us lot, we ain't racist, but look at the rest of the world. Do you get me?
Sure. I think that, at that point, there were always undertones of race and nativist versions of British and English identity underscoring the Leave campaign, but there was also an effort to portray it as merely an argument of economic and political common sense, and that's the sort of version that you're hearing from Sol Campbell and from David James. So I think it was, but they were good. They were good for leave. They made sense for them to put them up there. I mean, of course, on the other hand, you've got plenty of, sons of immigrants, on the Remain side. And I thought, again, so interesting that Rio Ferdinand said, in his post on the matter, I've never voted before in my life, but this is so important, I'm going to vote. And I just thought that was a really interesting moment. It pulled everybody slightly out of the woodwork. And, Rio made a really great argument. I mean, if only the Remain campaign actually had made it with the sort of passion and the authenticity of his personal story, we'd have, maybe that would have made a difference. I don't know, but I thought it was really remarkable.
I would take your thing further back. And see, for me, the greatest act of self-harm that the country has done since the Second World War is not Brexit, it's the sale of council housing. And for me, one leads to the other. Because the sale of council housing was done in order to destroy council housing and to push people into private land, in the return of the private landlord. And it's been a wrecking ball which has destroyed absolutely everything. Destroyed everything. Just look at the high street. It's destroyed the high street. The financialization of property has it's even destroyed personal relationships. Because personal relationships now are based on, does he or she have a house? All right, I'm in there. It's destroyed everything. It's been like a wrecking ball, which is why I think your book should be read in tandem with this by Danny Dorling, Shattered Nation.
Great book. I mean, that's one of the books that I read, in preparation for writing Injury Time, and it is a great book. And when I read it, it was one of the books that made me think, on issues like council housing and global economics and inequality. Yeah, Danny Dorling is 100% our man. But then there's all this other stuff going on, and I wanted to connect all of those together. And, the selling off of council housing, that was one of the great social, economic and cultural achievements of working class industrial Britain. I mean, it was an amazing thing. After the Second World War, we built millions upon millions of houses, decent houses, insulated houses.
Both political parties.
And I grew up in one. I don't know about you. I grew up in one, and it made life possible, made life tolerable. Despite any other kind of inequalities, like what a launch pad to have the security, of a council house in that regard. And it absolutely has been devastating. And when we now know that more than half of the houses sold under right to buy are in the hands of private landlords, and it has had a devastating consequence on communities, as you say, on the high street, and it's generated an enormous amount of anger. That sense of the social contract being broken. And it's one of the great, if you want to draw the parallels further, I often think, how did we manage to sit back and let the great institutions of English football, again, one of the priceless creations of working class industrial England, be just sold off on the cheap to a bunch of scallywags and scoundrels and oligarchs? And we allowed the same to happen to council housing. And
it's
inequality.
The society, football, the mirror between those two is that gives such depth to your book.
And it's and it's scary, and we still haven't turned it around. And one of the the other parallel is that for so long the ruling ideology, the ruling common sense is, well, you can't do anything about it. It's all been done. It's all over, done and dusted. And
it's not even
I don't think that.
It's not even as simple as that. I think because I don't quite agree, make of this whatever you like. And I grew up on a council estate, in fact, perhaps the most notorious one of all in London terms. And it was a wonderful place to be. And I remember certainly in the late 60s where a council flat was an aspiration, because many of us still lived in bedsits, a whole family, in my case, a whole family in a bedsit. many of my friends at school still went to the local baths for a shower of an evening, sometimes only once a week, but nevertheless, that's why they were called the local baths, because working class people didn't have bathrooms and showers in their own houses. They had a loo outside in what was a little shed, a wooden shed often enough, with a lavatory in it. It seems almost absurd now, but that was reality. So going to a council flat, even if you were up on the 20th floor of a council flat in Tottenham of all places, I remember, friends of mine who lived on the next road, there were 16 in their family. They moved to like a council flat, couldn't be more than 2 and 3 bedroom. They were so looking forward to it. Down the road, Tiverton Estate, I remember it very clearly. The Graysons moved in there, and they had their own like toilets indoors and bathroom, and don't know if they had central heating in that side, but they had like double glazing or something. The properties looked great. Having said that, this is England or Britain. And, since the feudal times, commoners' rights have been eroded, particularly with trespass laws and everything like that. Rights to roam have been eroded, etc. Ancient laws like the right to occupy an empty building, what we used to call squatting, which that's how I lived, when I was thrown out of home at the age of 17. That's what we were doing. We were squatting. That has been eroded. So I think, although you're absolutely right, we all assume that, oh, well, that's it, because it's always been like that, so it will always be like that. Part of it is that we always adapt to it. And I don't deny that the destruction of council housing is a particularly difficult. It's like the erosion of the BBC or the attacks on the BBC. You have this crown in your jewel, or the NHS. You go to other countries, like Americans say to me, "Oh, you lot are so lucky to have the NHS." Yeah, because it's the flipping best in the world. It's the one that established the idea of free healthcare at the point of need. We're the ones who did it, and then suddenly we're prepared to sell it out to the highest bidder. Mr. Trump will probably say now in his latest deals, "Look, I'll tell you what, you won't have to pay so many tariffs if you can open up the NHS to our pharmaceutical companies." So I'm saying it happens because of a disparity in what we used to call the class system in Britain. Some people make the rules. Babylon makes the rules. Was it Steel Pulse that did that? But that goes into one of your other chapters, leveling the playing field. This is a real issue. And by the way, before I forget, please forgive me, I wanted to say as well, when you were talking earlier on about football's ability to be able to interpret society as well, it's even changed the language. Look at the title of your book, Injury Time. Once upon a time, that was somebody who had to go to the NHS and wait in A&E for loads and loads of time. Now, the only thing you think about is, oh, for God's sake, this game's going to go on for 100 minutes. You know what I mean?
You cannot move for the use of football language in the public realm. I mean, only 2 days ago, Sadiq Khan, Mayor of London, talking about the first year of the Labour government, says we're 2-0 down, but there's still time to bring it round before the final whistle in the next election. And that's not odd. That's not actually now not unusual. I mean, I think you probably saw it in the book, when Jonathan Van Tam, the Deputy Chief Medical Officer during COVID, he never stopped using football metaphors as a way of trying to explain the importance of vaccines or whatever to the public. So it's absolutely the warp and weft of public conversation now in a way that, it never was before.
Cricket, didn't it, once upon a time? And now,
absolutely.
Use a cricket analogy and nobody gets it. I think Jonathan Van Tam was well advised by a PR company. Use football because that's a way of breaking down all these complex issues in a way that people will understand. But even people who don't follow football understand it. Whereas people who don't follow, cricket will have a hard time. There's that great John Betjeman poem. It's called Cricket Master. if you will indulge me for a moment, because it is one of those ones that I can actually sing. It's a poem by Betcham, and it goes, "My undergraduate eyes beholding, as I climb your slope, Cat Hill, what care I for past disasters? Applicant for cricket master, nothing much of cricket knowing, conscious but of money owing, somehow I would cope, Cat Hill." And then he goes on to say, "Oh my God, what is, how many balls making over? This, that, and the other." He doesn't know any of the cricketing terms. And he's like applying for a cricket master's job, etc. Nowadays, yeah,
Love it. I think
nowadays, if he had enough money, he would get it. And this is another of the themes of the book, isn't it? The great sell-off. We've been told for 45 years about the efficiency of the private sector and efficiency. And one of the things that your book strips very bare is the emperor's new clothes with these modern day capitalists. Some of them are. Go on.
I was just going to say, I mean, it just is extraordinary that, the 33 seasons of the Premier League, only 4 seasons as the Premier League en masse made a profit. I calculate that OnlyFans has paid more corporation tax in the last 2 years than the whole Premier League has in 33 years. I mean, I don't know quite what to make of that. It's extraordinary. I mean, the Premier League, $1 billion in debt. This is just absolutely insane. People, but then in the end, it's still really not a business. We talk about it like it's a business, but the currency is not profit and loss. The currency for the people who wield power is status, geopolitical positioning, soft power, a route to some kind of modicum of meaning for the ennui that strikes the global super rich. A desperate attempt to revive their ice cold souls by connection with humanity. And people pay a lot of money for their soul, eh?
One of my favourite things is who've come in thinking that they can make money from this. You talk about they're touching. All they know how to do is sweat the asset, which means cut, while giving themselves more bonus payments.
Yeah.
And in a genuinely competitive field, how stupid they are is revealed again and again and again. Is it not?
And their sort of naivety about technological optimism and all of the kind of whizzy bullshit accounting tricks that they pull to say, your trick is amortization over 8 years as a way of fiddling the books. And then you sell, how can Chelsea women be worth £200 million? But you sell that to one of your, associates, and suddenly you evade all the PSR rules. And this is what they're actually bringing. I mean, it's the trick generally of the global financial elite is to tell us how good they are, how much they're sorting it all out of cards while they enrich themselves and then make incredibly vulgar displays of their incredibly poor taste.
Were you tempted to do more on the Glazers than Man United?
Actually, the lawyers were much out the Glazers in that regard. I mean, I did think about doing a bit more about them. Work was done in the first 10 years. And they've just been plugging the same old tunes ever since. So,
this again is one of the geniuses of your book, is that you managed to tell Mayor ability to always, and you take us through those years from, I suppose, the financial crisis in 19. Things have happened since then, including, of course, the pandemic, bang in the middle of it. But augmentation of the United Kingdom, and that's always a point of debate as well. You know, listeners to this podcast will remember.
Even like
that's what I was about to say. I know, to raise it. You know, when Scotland meant something, Ireland meant maybe not so much Northern Ireland, but Wales also meant something in those days. And it was
I mean,
a
I
real
think
contest. And
the amazing thing about football in the United Kingdom is that it is a very rare example where we have distinct separate institutions. Devolution has begun to change that a little bit, but certainly before that, and the carapace of, you know, the United Kingdom, Britain, without ever actually addressing amazing space in which, you know, as we know, nations are imagined and invented that are discovered. They're, you know, social creations and inventions. And with that, I mean, the Scots have, you know, they've had their law, their separate university system. You know, there's a whole then and reinvent and demonstrate Englishness. You know, English National Opera, English Heritage football team has provided, and you know, both male and female, has provided animation. It's been really interesting to watch how this has played out over the last 10, 15 years. I'm looking at Wales, you know, who've had an amazing decade in football. This is their best ever. Rugby union would have been the space in which Welshness was publicly explored and in Welsh national football team. And a different kind of Wales is emerging. And no disrespect, but it's an older Wales. It's the Wales of the valleys and of the old and now tiring. And Welsh football is much more cosmopolitan, more global in its outlook, you know, not the Eisteddfod and a bunch of leeks and daffodils. And again, no disrespect to the Eisteddfod either. It's in that realm. And it's been a really interesting cultural experiment, you know, with the Welsh Football Association. Sometimes the 20th century, understanding football, you know, and sport as a really profound space. They're insisting on Wales being called Cymru, not just Wales. Why and why not? For us all, I've enjoyed that, and so that's been a really interesting space. And I mean, one which is still deeply conflictual. You know, I think it's a really important reminder that, like, oh, Northern Ireland, that's sorted, don't need to worry about that. And I changed, but also how the tensions and the conflicts of the last 100 years, and Scotland again is such an interesting example of, if it was economically painless, most of Scotland wouldn't hang around for two
time, didn't they? Stop us going up there. So
but then,
bigger war.
you know, from English football, as they now are, you know, so much money used to go north, and that makes, you know, a lot of people think twice about the independence movements. And then England, you know, as you know, English football and the English national football country, and absolutely the very best of the country. It's a really, really important. I mean, the whole flag thing that's going on at the moment, I think, is so interesting. Where the right are flag for their own narrow, appalling, nativist and uncultured. 10 years, actually, England and the St George's Cross has been a real rallying point. You know, all the evidence, you know, and all the surveys say that, you know, until now has been much easier to relate to because the Union Jack is it's the British Empire. And people
Scotland, it's a story that Scotland quite likes to forget.
Why they signed up. I mean, that's why they dissolved, basically, the Scottish Parliament. It's like they provided at one point a third of colonial governors and more than a third of the officer, all of the imperial guild for the English to deal with.
One thing about the England it just fascinating because Southgate seemed to me he was trying to build this bridge, kind of stand up for the Queen kind of bloke. And there was a bridge that he was trying, and the new, more inclusive, multicultural patriotism. And football, with his fantastic, the final played out, he showed that he tried, but it just couldn't hold. It couldn't in order. Now, even that alliance in football could not hold. And
it makes me think, my thoughts on that is that it's maybe we've just then this is just going to have to be a fight, is what I think, and I'm saying of Englishness, you know, it's like so bellicose and so.
anyone ever told them that, you know?
You know, England, I think about E.P. Thompson at the R for Elvis Costello and saying to the crowd, you know, and militarists, though it is that, it is a country of actors. This is the England of John Milton and Alexei Sale, you know, and William Zephaniah. That's my England, you know, an England of depth, of humour, of, you know, you're trying, what kind of England do you represent? And I think that hint of that, I thought, in the Euro is that, of course, the racists grabbed the headline for Marcus Rashford, you know, and for Jadon Sancho and for Saka was immense.
That outpouring of love continues till today. When people reference it in the general public, the England supporters, I think very acutely describe it. I actually think, Tim, that was a good moment, a great moment. We flushed out, as we see with the current sort of tax on migrant hotels. Things need to be said that aren't being said. We used to say them. When I went to live in Sweden, they kept, that was a much worse experience. You know, to go to somebody's house and realise, fuck's sake, they are really, really racist. I think once to visit the family of a girl that I was seeing, and she didn't realise her family was racist till I got there. Our relationship and her relationship with the parents and all of that. But here in Britain, they straight face, mate. I mean, somebody said that to me on air. I quite honestly, I don't like black people, and I just left it. I didn't say a word. I let her finish what she was saying. She ran for about, I just don't like black people. I don't like black people. And after I let her rant or go on for about that for a couple minutes, I suddenly said, it was, for me, it's like, well, at least we said it out in the open. Don't pretend you get on and talk to me like, you're my best friend and I Brutus and gases on me. No. Tell me to my face. And we had to have that conversation. It was an important moment.
Sure. It's so much easier.
Sorry.
Right. It's so much easier to have this conversation. It's when one generation does better than the previous, and it's working on that basis. The problem is that when you don't have a successful society, and this is why I go back to property, doesn't create any value. It just concentrates income. Doesn't create value. It's just madness. It's one of the things you also touch on. To the absolute disgrace of FT token things and the cryptocurrency, because if you strip them back, all wealth from people who don't have money to people who already have lots.
It's an absolute disgrace. These are nothing but Ponzi schemes. And that, the fan tokens. I think the NFTs are sort of like laughably the ape cartoons and like, okay, it's bad and it's a rip-off and it's to allow the fan tokens to operate, which are so obvious. And, they say, oh no, it's all about, fan engagement and fan vote on whose toilet bag in the dressing room we get a photo of. This is an absolute gambling on shirts, socios in particular, but are driven out. And the gambling, I should say, I have a bet on the World Cup. In fact, I've got it right the last two. I would say, my passion, right? And there's nothing, but what we've got going on in football is, somewhere in the region of 400 or 500 gambling-related suicides in Britain. And this has just got to stop. I mean, 500 suicides. So, ill health and misery and family breakup, because people have been versus, Preston game. I find that just absolutely so depressing. I mean, really, it's like pull your finger out, people.
Do you remember when we thought it was the end of Formula One people by smoking on their motor vehicles? Oh no, it's going to be the end of Formula One. Oh, a shocking thing about the betting sponsorship, which I think is a particular issue, just like drink. The most shocking thing is, you go down the road and see a 7-year-old kid wearing that replica shirt.
Yeah.
What we do?
Well, check out Match of the Days magazine, the BBC's Match, absolutely plastered with gambling, and the most extraordinary, I put this, there's a colouring in page, right, for the under fives. It's got bet under fives. Like, this is, if it wasn't so awful, it would be really funny. So rein itself in here. This is not acceptable.
That is more or less the conclusion of your book, though, isn't it?
Little bit of hope at the end of the book, because for me, the most, you look at the human being, we're not very fast, we're not very strong. How on earth have we to cooperate? That's why we have language, for example. It's one thing to have the potential of language, but why do you cross this river? But I need you to cross the river as well, because we got to hunt together. Because I'm going to dominate you. Yeah.
No, I do. Though I have to work at it, a lot of optimism. Football possesses really profound in much of British society. It really is a space that is communitarian. It really, that we are bigger, than the sum of our parts. We really link, and you have to look after that weakest link. That success and failure, these are profound truths with real moral and political weight. That last minute turnarounds can happen. And naive maybe I am, but it's aspects of our political and collective life. And here it is right in front of us every Saturday, there it is. And that is an extraordinary resource, and you see it extraordinary. 1.7 million, at least, more than any other social activity or organisation, and their best of their time and their energy, to this process. You look at the food banks actually they called it. But anyway, Everton's new gap, the food banks in all of Liverpool. I mean, from the generosity of football fans gathering and organising, at its best, football not just brings us together, but I thought there were moments of that in the challenge to the European Super League as well.
It's the moment when I felt
all of that is sitting, and I don't think that's just football. I think that's British society, and the violent racists grab the headlines and try and dominate the street. But they are not the majority. Actually, there is a majority that is progressive and communitarian. I mean, I think that about the race issue is booing people taking the knee, and then eventually, the others get around to like, oh, actually, when in the friendlies in the lead up to Euro 2020, and sure, it took people time and people were a little bit unpleasant, but eventually we got there, and that gives me hope for the country, and it gives me hope being into the forces of global capitalism, and I'm not giving in to the forces of cultural cynicism. It would be equals a space where hope and the possibility of the impossible. I was saying to someone earlier, and get that kind of shiver down my spine. It's like anything can happen, nothing happens, and sometimes shit happens, and it's amazing. And I think we miss that, and we need to feel that in our heart.
Of course, there has always been interpreted in global terms, and particularly in England, perhaps more so than other countries, whether it's because of our relation, arrogance, as you often talk about, Tim, about how it was beneath us. Look, England has a particular relationship to football that maybe other countries don't have. This in your book, David, is that you talked of England losing fall of the empire, and it did seem to go instant change, etc., and the independence of first Ghana in Africa seemed to go in tandem with that time. If there was a game today of the national team that expressed book, what would that game be?
Oh, you put me on the spot, you bugger. Let me question. I mean, okay, so one positive, I think 22 are the two sides of England. The men's final, as you know, was an at-riven, toxic, masculine madness with an extra serving of entitled racism. There are no rules. So that's one, and that is part of winning the following year. And I talk about this in the book, but what a different English being shouted at. David Goldblatt. I'm thinking, oh my God, what's going on? This woman's picked up my bank, and that would have been down Tesco's buying fags on contactless or a kind of stack of beer, right? Second World War. And most fantastic of all, I was there with my partner Sarah and to Match of the Day on a Saturday night. She knows the names and addresses, but basically she didn't give a fuck. She's standing there and she said to me, you know, we won. And it's the first time she said, I actually felt like part of the week. I was just like, wow, what a moment, what a transplant of England, you know. And that's England, you know, and that's football in England. It's me unparalleled joy, and it makes me totally despair at the same times.
I like that. Tim, what would you go for?
It really has, because it's such a complex and contradictory country. You know, what do you think of, what is England to you? Doing Eddie's Dreaming, you know, a song I sent to you once. It's got a kind of salsa vibe to it. You know, in '66, someone from like the Windrush generation, they've assimilated that, is England, but the dark side is so dark, isn't it? And so you think and sort this out.
Right now, you know, it'll be there on Saturday morning in Bristol before I go to Bristol Rovers. Anti-fascists will be lining up against them. The fight is here. This is not, this is like the climate from now. It's all here right now, you know, and we need to engage. The very best of what I see in the country and the very best of what I see in football, and it's interesting, I think the populists, much as they would love to mobilise football, and I don't think, I'm not sure, you know, I think it's really interesting that, you know, that Spivell fan, he loves to play, right? The man down the pub you can have a beer and a fag with, right? Even if he is public school. You know, and he's toyed with sending down Selhurst Park too recently. And I'm not sure what of a reception he would get. Like, yeah, sure, they got a few nasty old casuals who want to turn up for a punch-up outside the hostel. 70s and 80s, when the NF was, like, seriously entrenched, you know, at Leeds, being naive, but I don't see that.
The players, with the taking a knee thing, the way that the white players just clicked it, coming up the youth ranks with so many black players, they've got a window into the black experience, and as a result of generations
not
living
just
together.
a window, but one that they've actively jumped through. I think, and here I'm going to say, have been challenged and undermined by Wayne Rooney, who in his interview on the BBC this week said that he's talking about now, is educated himself in other people's religions and in black history. serious conversations with them about what's serious in their lives. I just thought, this is it's a different generation of footballers. It's a different generation, of course. Joey Barton has his constituency, but I think they're the.
Yeah, I think that's the past. England flag, or the flag of St. George earlier on, there is a trajectory there because we're very much on the march. The more sort of like fearsome aspect of the far right was MP, the British National Party, and whereas the National Front went for the Union flag, sort of anti-National Front or anti-Nazi League marches there were in those days. 16th Street, they turn the corner, there'd be all these like hundreds of Union flags. Then you knew your National Party. Their symbol was the flag of St. George, and that if I saw somebody with a flag of St. George, I would be really intimidated about 1975, 76, 77 maybe. And then something happened during clearly Euro 96, and suddenly the Sun had on its front pages, into that, and that's when I realised, it's safe, as Laurence Olivier says over and over, that he plays a former dentist.
Yeah, that's
what I was going to say is, why I've got hope is that it's like you've got this Bergkamp preface or thought, philosophical football always needs some form behind it. It's exactly what you're saying about Wayne Rooney. Thought, the philosophical thought about what is this about, and where is my space in this? It would be a game in the future, which would be when England, any time now, wins. That I saw that England changed most profoundly, and I talked to you about this, Tim, was when England played Brazil, and the game was
2002.
early in the morning for us.
Yeah, I remember this. Go on.
Yeah. Well, I sat there, and my daughter was probably about 4 or 5 years old. Who are you supporting? And I said, without missing a beat, Brazil, of course. She looked like she was going to hit me. And she wouldn't do that, of course. And it was the first time I ever took a proper look at the England team. So I loved the 66 team, etc., but never looked beyond their football shirts to see who they really were, or either ethnically African Caribbean, whether they be of mixed heritage or print men, whatever that means. And I realised that things had changed, but I think it will really change everybody in the team, because that's really what is going to defend that. After 66, we lived on that for half a century, and we still arguably do to a certain extent. And I think, you know, the Euro scandal with the penalty shootouts, etc. But what I was going to say, the most profound moments I ever experienced was they were talking to back, obviously when he was still at Arsenal, and his best mates with Bukayo Saka, they grew up together and everything like that. I couldn't tell who was Bukayo Saka and who was Emil Smith Rowe. They talked in exactly that all the kids have nowadays. Yeah, so what's he going to do? I remember driving into Media City where Five Live are based one Friday evening, and he was on the radio. And I haven't experienced it myself, but my brother has, and he tells me all about it, you know, because his brothers of mixed heritage have some black either in them, in their family, amongst their friends, you know? For me. Any thoughts, David? Yeah. Well, don't leave me.
Of course, we have won the Euros twice, but the women's team, and this is interesting, you know, is
that's the point I was going to make earlier on. You know, with the exception of James and I seem to be white working class. The women's
class very much. Yeah, and I'm not. It's really. I mean, I think, you know, the FA is made that the routes into women's football slightly different from the men's game, but I think it's a real issue. And I think if you've gone back, you know, to the era Al was the coach of the women's team, you know, which was a really amazing thing. Black London lesbian in charge of England, like diverse body of women players in England. And it's interesting. I don't know what the art, I don't know needs to be done about it, but it was, I think you're right, Dotun, to say it's like when England, the racist fans are, I mean, the England women's fan base is completely different. I mean, if you've ever been to, you know, like, it's a whole completely different vibe. You're not going to get that kind of like toxic male. Unbelievable when that happens. I cannot wait to it. And I'm under a German coach.
Yeah, well, we're running out of time. We're running out of time for that one, so I'm not sure he's or Serena Wiegman. Why not? Dutch, but nevertheless. But let me say very quickly on a final point, I think a pretty much existential race crisis with allegations against the coach, remember, is how that impacts on people. You don't realise.
That's a really good point, man. That's a very, and the treatment of any Luco and other members of the squad. So yeah, no, look,
Women came out in support of the coach, many of them. As I was looking at that wouldn't have enticed camp, and I think those things take a while to
think you're right.
Yes, indeed. Injury time. Thank you very much. Tim, that's what you're here for. Amongst other legendinos in one pod. Can't do better than that. Welcome back anytime. The book's called Injury Time. It's by half because you're going to take it to bed with you.
Well, thank you very much, Scott. It's been lovely to be with you. It's always a pleasure to surface. So, anytime. Plus, Dotun, really love your sofa, dude.
Thank you. Yes. My daughters do too. It's in terms of fashion. They love
us. Like that a lot.
Thank you. And John, and sometimes Thursdays as well.
Get in touch with the Brazilian Shirt Name Podcast on Twitter at BrazilShirtPod, or you can email us BrazilianShirtNamePod@gmail.com. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe, rate and tell a friend. The Brazilian Shirt Name Podcast is an 1129 production.